Chapter 1 is about cellular biology, the structure and function. This is primarily a review of physiology, and you can skip this lecture if you feel fairly confident. What I've tried to do here is pick the important concepts that we're going to focus on throughout the semester regarding the cellular structures and processes and how they are altered during diseases. Cellular functions are specialized to do different things. This is just a list of all the different kinds of things the cells can do. This is a nice picture of the cellular contents as a review. If you don't remember, we do not need to know all of these things, but there are certain parts of the cell that are very important to some of the processes that get altered during disease. For example, the nucleus is important because it contains all the genetic materials for cell reproduction. That would be the DNA. And it also is where RNA synthesis takes place. Mitochondria is where energy production takes place and ATP production. It also plays a role in apoptosis, which is programmed cell death, pH regulation, and osmotic regulation. The endoplasmic reticulum is where protein synthesis, lipid synthesis, and regulation of calcium takes place. Lysosomes, we're going to talk about those, is where digestion or phagocytosis ensues. The Golgi complex is where the cell actually takes those ATP packages, ATP molecules, and packages them up for energy transport. And we're going to talk a lot about the cellular membrane, where diffusion and osmosis and cell recognition takes place on that cell membrane. The cell membrane is very important in the communication process of cells. At that plasma membrane, we can have communication taking place via the receptor proteins that are on the cell. These receptor proteins are utilized in a multitude of processes, such as transport channels, surface markers, cell adhesion, but you just need to know that those plasma proteins that are on the outside cell layer are important for cellular communication in different cellular processes. The proteins themselves communicate in this manner. Not important that you memorize this, but we're going to talk about processes where these communication plasma proteins are not working correctly. The other way that cellular communication can take place is through neurotransmitters and hormonal kinds of communication, and we will talk in detail about what this looks like. Metabolism is the process of how a cell maintains its essential cellular functions. Just a vocabulary issue to remember. It's important to understand what the word anabolism means, meaning energy using, and catabolism, meaning energy releasing. ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, is the major component for energy production for cell survival. And we'll talk about a lot of processes throughout the course of this semester where energy is stored and transferred through the use of ATP and what happens when that isn't happening. Conceptually, we need to understand how glucose metabolism takes place. It has an anaerobic process as well as an aerobic process, and we're going to talk about those processes in detail as we talk about diseases. But this is an overall simple picture of how we process glucose within the body. Anaerobic metabolism is the process where the process called glycolysis, where we break down the contents. The major ideas here for anaerobic metabolism for you to understand and keep in your head is not so much what happens without the process, but the fact that glycolysis is an anaerobic process. There's very little energy produced, and the predominant waste product is lactic acid. And that lactic acid is not good for the body, so it creates multiple other problems. This is the best that the body can do if there is no oxygen present to properly break down glucose for energy use. So your body is this wonderful machine that adapts its processes based on what kinds of elements or nutrients it has available to do. But the bottom line is it's always trying to maintain homeostasis. So for a while, your body can function properly under an anaerobic metabolism system, but eventually this is not going to be good because that lactic acid is going to create multiple other problems, and the fact that you aren't producing any energy through this breakdown of glucose means that the body isn't getting any energy to improve. Aerobic energy metabolism, or the citric acid cycle, or also known as the Krebs cycle, is where and how the body produces most of its energy, The waste product that is produced here is CO2, and CO2 is easily dispersed outside of the body or absorbed in other processes. So it's a more natural, holistic way that the body prefers to process glucose. Vocabulary-wise, the difference between active and passive transport is important to understand, and how molecules and solutes move across the membranes will be very important to understand. So diffusion is the movement of solutes or molecules from an area of greater concentration to that of a lesser concentration. The size of the molecules and how lipid soluble they are makes a difference. How fast that occurs is related to that electrical potential across the membranes, that sodium-potassium pump. So diffusion is the movement of solutes. Remember, the body is always working toward homeostasis, so we're trying to get the same amount of particles on one side of the membrane as there are on the other side of the membrane. Filtration is the movement of water and solutes through a membrane because there's a greater pressure on one side versus the other. And remember, again, we're trying to make it so that it's equal, but if it's not, you're going to get differences in hydrostatic pressure and blood pressure. Last but not least, osmosis is the movement of water. And this water is attracted to the area that has the more molecules. And this pressure we're going to talk a lot about in disease processes. It's very prominent in the production of edema. It's important in the process of dehydration. So understand how the three ways that the cell can have membrane transport. This is a sodium-potassium pump that I made reference to before, where we're talking about how sodium goes from the outside of the cell to the inside of the cell, triggering an opening of those channels and letting things in. Last but not least, there are several types of tissues that get made within the body and differentiated. The four basic types are nerve, skin, connective, and muscle. The structure and function of these types of tissue dictate what the tissue is able to do. So, for example, nerve cells are very highly specialized cells called neurons, and they are able to receive and transmit electrical impulses across synapses to communicate. Epithelial cells cover most of our internal and external body surfaces, and these are our first line of defense for infection and immunity. Connective tissue is how tissues and organs are bound together, and muscle tissue is composed of a type of myocyte that actually enables movement. And that's it for the summary of Chapter 1, Cellular Biology. I know that the chapter is very long and there are multiple other things within the chapter. I might suggest that if you feel you want more, to go to page 34 through 36 and review the Did You Understand key points rather than read the entire chapter.